Hello, friends. I'm happy to be back. One day up, one day down, with number 86 of the Rays and Initiations webinar commentaries. It's a little daunting to try to think with great comprehensive seriousness about this book. It's a very advanced book. It contains rules that will be, well, they're in the libraries of Shamballa. They're effective throughout the Aquarian Age, and much, much older than that. So I think, effective whenever group work on the subject of initiation is undertaken. So I just have to say that the daunting nature of this I may have not been plugged in. Okay, well, like I say, it's a daunting process to undertake any real approach, a serious, comprehensive approach to this wonderful book. I remember Mary Bailey saying, partly in humor, but partly in truth, that the Rays and Initiations was her Bible, so to speak, and she did launch, I think in the 1970s, for the Arcane School, that important lesson set called The Bridge to the Future, which dealt with the rules and other factors to be found within the Rays and Initiations. But we'll do our best. It's not going to be light reading for everybody, but for serious students of the Ageless Wisdom, and for those of you who intend to be part of the new school setup in your next incarnation, when these new schools really take off with the masters behind them, and initiates guiding the various schools as they emerge. Well, I think it will be useful in preparation. So this next section is called The Effect of the Ray of Harmony Through Conflict in the Modern World of Nations. Well, okay, that's 70 years ago, but something about the foresight of a master makes what he says valid for years to come. It always amuses me how it can be said that the content, let's call it, of the 14 rules, or even of the 14 rules for disciples, can be transcended because the books of Alice Bailey are old and passé. It's like saying that portions of the library within Shamballa, maybe DK has a library card, I don't, can be passed by because they're old. Well, a true sense of proportion, a true sense of humility would reveal the value of such statements. As we approach what some may regard as a highly controversial subject, I would remind you that we must attempt to see the picture whole, in some such manner as the agents of divine will see it, and let's just say those in Shamballa and in the higher ranges of the hierarchy. Embracing the past of the nations involved, a past which is seldom good. Okay, well, that's a factual statement, because just as the history of a human being is rooted in an almost inevitable selfishness, so it is with the nations in which they find themselves. Seeing the effects of that past as they work out in the present, and as they are the inevitable result of the law of cause and effect, the karma of the nations, basically. He said that so much that happened in World War II of a totally horrific and disgusting nature had its root in Atlantis, and were he to describe it, he wouldn't be believed. It just depends on our trust in the Master and on the revelation that will one day come to us when we can handle it. So these effects are the result of the law of cause and effect, and attempting also to foresee the future in terms of the lessons learnt and new habits of a better nature established. Well, already, let's say, the United Nations was taking form, and there was optimism about the world. Well, there were certainly moves on the part of some of the victor nations to solidify their hold on the smaller nations that fell under their purview. I'm thinking particularly of the Soviet Union, but obviously the United States sought to consolidate its power. And there were other movements which were not in the direction of the hoped for possibilities. Yet there was the sense that things could be better, and a new opening was coming. I would remind you also that the governing principles of this ray, the fourth, is conditioning all the nations, because after all, we're talking about nations of human beings, governed by the fourth ray. It is the fourth kingdom and also the fourth creative hierarchy of monads, and has done so with increasing potency since the year 1850. Well, why 1850? Without a little research, I'm not going to know that. But I did once do some strong cyclic research and found that the year 1825 was extremely important in terms of both the Shamballa impact of that year and the great second ray philanthropic urge that came in. Now, 25 years later, the fourth ray cycle may very well be associated with the number 25. This is what the ray theorist Stephen Pugh says. I think, he may have something there. And it would be part of the fourth ray cycle, in as much as anything that's on the second ray is also subsuming the fourth ray. So since 1825 was a strong second ray impulse, we have to look at these centennial meetings of the hierarchy occurring in what for us are the 25 years, 1825, 1725, 1925, 2025, coming up. We have to look at them as related to the fourth creative hierarchy of monads, and no matter what the kingdom may be, even if you're the Christ, you are a member of that fourth creative hierarchy of monads. You're not yet a solar angel, because, such a being as the Christ is presently on the path of earth service, and so it is with all who remain as part of the hierarchy. So anyway, there is, in connection with these centennial meetings, something connected with the number 25. There's a law of magnetism. It's a sort of the fourth law. It's connected with the solar angels. It is the fourth law, and the 2 and the 5 are connected with the solar angels as well, and they are great Buddhic intermediaries. Again, the number 4 is involved. So the year 1850, there may be a number of cyclic overlaps there, but until I would get out my cyclic research, I couldn't confirm it, except to say that associated with that number would be the fourth ray. And this is at the time, interestingly enough, when Neptune had just been recently discovered, one of the rulers of the fourth or Buddhic plane. And let's see, 250 years from the year 1600, but it's in 1575, actually, that the second ray cycle began. So the 250-year mark was more the 1825. Anyway, let's just consider it important, and that we have a lot to learn about the cycles, the learning of which pretty much consists of the kind of all knowledge on the third subplane of the atomic plane, at least all knowledge with respect to the cycles that demonstrate on the cosmic physical plane. Just as in the same manner as this principle of conflict controls the battling life of the aspirant, what a statement, but we can all attest to that, because minimally, if we're interested in this stuff, we're going to be aspirants, and minimally. But of course, to be an aspirant, even the Christ is an aspirant towards some very high degree. So it's not a minimization to call yourself an aspirant. We aspire, which is a scientific method of elevation, towards our next step ahead, and hopefully we have the steadiness of the disciple to make it happen. So just as in the same manner as the principle of conflict controls the battling life of the aspirant, and of the world aspirant, the entire human family, and notice that sometimes he calls it the world disciple, and sometimes the world aspirant. So maybe humanity is both world disciple and the world aspirant. So it must inevitably control the life of nations, consisting, of course, of human beings, at least as we count nations. When we think of nations, we don't immediately think of the animal and plant life, though it is something to contemplate naturally. So it must inevitably control the life of nations to a greater or lesser degree according to their materialistic or their spiritual status. Fourth ray is involved in both, but it will operate differently. Come, surely must be a way. Let's just say more towards harmony, more towards harmony when spiritual, and conflict when material. There is a higher part of this ray and a lower part, and DK in other places has identified the higher part as related to harmony and the lower part related to conflict. According to their materialistic or their spiritual status, according to the type of energy which may be expressing itself through them, and according to the energy, not just force, but energy, and according to the age of the nation under consideration, and we might call it also soul age. Sometimes he talks about Great Britain being quite mature and understanding service better than many, and able to handle things that an adolescent nation like the United States cannot yet properly handle. So, the analogy is there. There are degrees of spiritual elevation of any nation. There are also those nations which are new and just have to, kind of handle their own physicality and their right orientation emotionally, and are just now beginning to offer some kind of education. They're not integrated yet, you see. But it makes sense to consider the analogy strongly, and some nations are closer to that first initiation than others. From certain angles, the youngest of the angles are Germany and Italy, for they only arrived at nationhood in the 19th century. Yet. Of course, the people here have a very ancient history if we look at it from another perspective, which is why he says from certain angles. The oldest nation with the clearest unified record is Japan. And yet its maturity, well, let's just say its age, was not equivalent to maturity because it fell under the glamour of the samurai and the attempt to resurrect the nobility of the samurai. The symbol was beautiful, the rising sun, but it can be the rising sun of national egoism, as well as standing for the soul. Hitler was very pleased to have Japan as an ally because he said it was a nation that had never yet lost a war. The United States of America is always regarded as a young nation. Well, it was not 200 years yet when this was being written, and now it's over 200 years. It's almost getting close to 250 years. The United States of America is always regarded as a young nation, but from the angle of a unified central government, the two Axis powers, this is still in the war, I suppose, are still younger, and this has had a definite bearing on their activities, but again, from certain angles. We have to be careful, lest, we cannot forget Rome and all that meant basically for the forthcoming nation of Italy, even though it divided into so many little city-states and duchies and small fiefdoms and so forth, just as Germany did. Maybe Italy is older in that respect, and Germany consisted more of the tribal nature. In the world at this time, the two aspects of the fourth ray, the aspect of or principle of conflict and the aspect or principle of harmony, are struggling to bring about the liberation into equilibrium of mankind. Seems that we can't do without the clarifying dynamic of conflict. It actually demonstrates to us in expression what's really there, the low as well as the high. So in that kind of friction, illumination is brought forward, and then we know where we stand, and comes the necessity to somehow equilibrize these forces. You see something like the word equilibrium, you think of Libra, even though Libra in the ray presentation we're given doesn't include the fourth ray, yet on some level I believe it does. I mean, if a human being can have a number of rays, monadic, soul, personality, and of all the vehicles, so can a great lord of a constellation. Until quite lately, the principle of conflict has grown increasingly in power. I guess when this was written, Mars in relation to Scorpio had just reached its apotheosis and was now then waning, I think somewhere in 1946, something like that. And this is written in 48. So that certainly added to the principle of conflict. Yet, as a result of this conflict, a definite trend towards harmony can be seen emerging in human thinking. Well, humanity doesn't want to forever undergo the friction, the waste, the pain, the halting of possible progress that conflict involves. After all, you have to, in a way, you have to stop to fight. And what is stopped is the forward advancement of the human race. The concept of harmony through the establishing of right human relations is slowly coming into recognition. Notice how these are inevitable. Harmony, fourth ray, right human relations, second ray, they are inevitably related. Now, he's looking at things, of course, from the human perspective, but since the human race is the macrocosm for the three subhuman kingdoms under it, they will be affected by what happens in humanity. And I think when humanity comes into greater measure of peace, we'll see that in the animal kingdom, now ruled by Mars and the third ray. And who knows how it will affect the plant and mineral kingdoms. So anyway, we cannot forever waste our energies through conflict. And there comes a time when people weary of the conflict and decide that it's really time for the economy of harmony and the directing of human forces in an agreed upon positive direction. We're not there yet, obviously. We're right in the midst of a tremendous psychological, spiritual conflict between the personality and the soul of humanity. It's a dweller soul issue, and once again the Black Lodge is on the attack and wants to feed the personality nature, which is naturally going to emerge into prominence anyway, bringing its dangers, as the Tibetan has said, because the personality is inherently self-emphasizing and separative, unless guided by the soul. So there are certain things periods we have to learn to live through, and if we can see the process in the larger sense, we won't be quite so daunted or appalled by what appears to be happening. We have to see through it. The activities of mankind, and particularly of governments, had been ignobly selfish and controlled by the concepts of fighting, aggression, and competition for untold millennia, thousands of years. Oh, without the nobility of the soul, and simply seeking to aggrandize themselves. I'm thinking of, what was it? One of these famous Japanese movies, The Seven Samurai, or was it The Seventh Samurai, Seven Samurai? It was about samurai warriors who undertook to oppose themselves to marauding gangs of thieves, these powerful groups, completely selfish, would ride into a village and take everything the village had. Just selfish. Take their food, take everything, as if they had simply the right to do so because might makes right, in that ignoble reversion of the true idea that right makes might. The territories of the planet have changed hands many times, and the Earth has been the playground, or should we call it a battleground, of a long succession of conquerors. It's interesting, at some point DK criticized these conquerors as disrupting the progress of the time, and he even included such as the impersonality of the masters, the earlier incarnation of an advanced Chauhan, Master Morya, as Akbar. He mentioned Akbar as one of those conquerors whose exploits had stopped the progress of people moving forward. When you come in with your will and you take everything from those who are slowly but surely moving forward, you stop their possibilities. And who have they been, Some of those who are now great fighters on behalf of humanity, but in their earlier incarnations, they didn't know any better. They didn't understand what now they understand. It would be interesting to study those moments of realization when those who are now the great members of hierarchy realized that they had to drop aspects of their selfishness. Ashoka. I'm thinking of a great conqueror in the days of India who became a Buddhist emperor and obviously underwent some kind of conversion. Sometimes I wonder whether that was Master M. And then I guess he became a conqueror on behalf of Buddhism. It's hard to take from your long-established tendencies, orientations which don't necessarily help humanity. You have to outgrow them. You have to see what they really are. So many times the territories have changed hands, and of course this has led to great disputes as to who really owns what. We see this problem, in Israel now and in the whole Middle East area. All we have to go back is thousands of years, and who are the original owners? What is an owner? Someone with temporary control over an area, but it's not forever. So the heroes of the race perpetuated in history, stone and human thinking, have been warriors, and conquest has been an ideal. This is the, obviously, let's just say, the lower part of the fourth ray, along with the first ray. The World War, 1914-1945, marked the culminating point in the work of the principle of conflict. As I say, more specifically, he's talked about Mars in relation to Scorpio reaching its highest degree of expression there towards the end, marked a culminating point in the work of the principle of conflict, and as I've shown, the results of this work are today inaugurating a new era of harmony and cooperation, because the trend of human thinking is towards the cessation of conflict. Well, even warring humanity of the fourth kingdom can get tired of the waste of energy which conflict almost inevitably involves. Of course, the fight had to take place. Once the forces of evil had made their attack due to the rising spiritual status of humanity, the fight had to take place, and Master DK at one point talks to his disciples, and he says, the surprising thing for a second-rate master, he says, see that you battle. We should never forget it's peace is not laziness, and it's not the inability to rise when true values of a spiritual kind are challenged. I suppose that's why Gandhi, whom so many people celebrate, was taken to task by the masters as espousing a point of view which, if followed, would have led to the victory of the Axis powers. I did talk to some people in India, and it was surprising how strong Nazism or some sort of related movement was during the Second World War in India, something we may little suspect. So our trend is towards the cessation of conflict. This is an event of major importance and should be regarded as a turning point in human affairs. That is the will to harmonize, let's call it that way. This trend is impulsed by a weariness of fighting. Well, that's it, like even blunder-headed humanity can finally get tired of hitting its head against the wall. This trend is impulsed by a weariness of fighting, by a changing rating as to the values of human accomplishment. Finally, rating those values akin to harmony more highly than the conquest of one by another, of one part by another. It's always separatistic. It's non-holistic. When you're truly on the fourth ray of harmony, you realize that it's a question of having all sides win so that wholeness and unity can be achieved. Everybody's got a little bit of the divine will. Everybody has to win. And if anybody is excluded, no matter how humble, a tiny little piece of the plan and purpose at the beginning are prevented from expression. So this trend is impulsed by a weariness of fighting, by a changing rating as to the values in human accomplishment, and by a recognition that true greatness is not expressed through such activities as those of Alexander the Great, who, by the way, was kind of an interesting harmonizer after he conquered a people. He adopted the Persian ways. Can't get rid of his fourth ray. Julius Caesar, more ray 1 and 3. Napoleon, ray 1 and 4. Or Hitler, ray 1 and 6, I think. But by those who see life and humanity in the world as one united whole, interrelated, cooperative, and harmonized, then you need the higher part of the fourth ray to see that. And you need some of the holistic second ray under Jupiter to see that. Those who struggle for this world unity and who educate the race in the principles of harmony and right relations will someday be recognized as the true heroes. So again, it's not might makes right. And let's remember, this is first a second ray planet, and not, as will be the case in the next solar system, a first ray monadic planet. The factor that must and will relate the principle of conflict to the expression of harmony and bring about the new world order, nothing wrong in that, though people do fear it, that they will have their personality prerogatives removed. The new civilization and culture being even more fundamental at first than the new civilization, is the trend and the voice of public opinion. We see how powerful it is. It's a real force. And it works subtly, because everybody has a piece of the divine will and the opinion, when joined to other opinions, becomes a moving direction. It moves in a direction which carries the will of the people. Is the trend and the voice of public opinion, people making their voice heard, and increasingly it is the case. Oh, I've done it again, huh? Well, I hope that you've been able to hear me, although I've been maybe a little bit remote. So, culture first, civilization, resulting from it, the New World Order, characterizing the civilization, people speaking out increasingly. You just have to look at the modern news feeds, and people who are just people, are giving their opinion and are questioned, and their voice reaches millions. And the opportunity offered to people everywhere to bring about social security and right human relations. Is this related to the program that we have in the various countries? In the United States called Social Security. But obviously, when there is fear about where the next meal is coming from, where the possibility of salary is coming from, people will do all kinds of things that are outside the law to guarantee that, or will enter a state of rebellion and social tumult. It is not the government of any nation which will bring this about, but the innate rightness of the people themselves when they have been educated to see the issues clearly. Okay, innate rightness to see the issues clearly. Education. And this, of course, is the key. When education dwindles, the choices made by the people of a nation are correlationally less wise and favoring more the elemental life. So the people have been educated to see the issues clearly. The relationships which should be established and the immense subjective unity of mankind. Well, it's a big stretch. It doesn't mean that we have to be united in any totalitarian outer manner, like some of the collectivization that occurred in the Soviet Union, let's say, where people were ripped away from their independence and their livelihood and their farms and their businesses and collectivized, made to follow one particular conformist method. That's the very totalitarianism against which DK has invaded so strongly. So the people themselves, government won't do this, it'll be the people. That's why the voice of the people is so important, and depriving them of the vote and making it more difficult for them to vote is really a sin against the nation. The relationships which should be established and the immense subjective unity of mankind. So far, we don't really see this. So many of us are under the grip of our elemental nature. It's just a matter of how things evolve, and people are where they are, but they can be hastened out of that cramped and confined perspective. They can be educated more broadly. This will not come about without an intensive period of planned education. Well, there's all kinds of attacks against real education now. A dumbing down of the populace. Maybe I should just speak for the United States. I can't say it's true of other nations, but almost as if there's a planned attempt to make the people less intelligent and more servile. But anyway, an intensive period of planned education, real education, education for higher values of a truly free press and radio, not just controlled by the owners with their biases, both free to speak the exact truth, notice the fifth ray there, and to present the facts as they occurred. Notice we're, in the U.S., we're starting to live in a post-fact era. My fact's as good as your fact, regardless of what is true. This is a terrible development, but hopefully it will be revealed for what it is. There are those, Christ bringing the sword of discrimination. There are those who are standing on one side for the truly free press and factuality, and those whose opinions masquerade as facts. So a truly free press and radio, both free to speak the exact truth and to present the facts as they occur without being controlled or influenced by government interference, pressure groups, religious organizations, or by any dictating parties or dictators. Free to speak the truth. Well, it's hardly the case yet. Every news feed seems to have its bias, some maybe less than others, and its idealism, which the facts are not allowed to countervene. This will take us back to the motto of the Theosophical Society: there is no religion higher than truth. And, if we want to extend that idea, there is no ideal or idealism higher than truth. The sin of the Roman Catholic Church in its effort to dictate to people what they should think, in those days, here's a book on the proscribed list. You can't read this. It's not allowed that you read this. Well, there's not a whole lot of trust there in people's ability to make up their own mind. They are treated like sheep that have to be led in a certain direction. So according to the Tibetan here, the sin of the Roman Catholic Church in its efforts to dictate what people should think, theologically and politically, what they should do, read, and wear. This is an example, and to a great extent is the crime of Russia. So, it's kind of totalitarianism which prevents the true will nature which all possess from emerging and making its contribution. It's based on a profound lack of trust in the masses of people, lest they go against the adhered to ideology. This is old, of course. I think there's been a lot of progress in the Catholic Church over the years, and great figures have emerged to give a greater democracy to the people. The mass of the people in the strictly Catholic countries are not as free in their thinking as those living in the Protestant lands. Well, they protested, they protested the authoritarianism of often an Italian pope or a pope from whatever nation who was infallible. The infallibility of the pope, huge glamour. It's based almost like on the divine right of kings, they can't possibly make a mistake. And it's meant as a device for control. The Russian people know no freedom, at least, well, this was 1948, right? Stalin died in 53, was it? The Russian people know no freedom and have no opportunity to form their own point of view. It's not the case now. Commercial interests and expediency impose restrictions in other countries. So the business community demands certain results and perhaps innovation and sharing and a more benevolent, inclusive point of view with regard to the financial conditions of others. These are not even considered. By means of these sources of control, the growth of true understanding is prevented, distorted, or stunted. These are the external controlling forces which keep the internal man from emerging, and that internal man has a gift. Everyone has a gift, no matter how much the personality conditioning seems to prevent that gift from emerging. We have to realize when we look at a human being, we're looking at a master in the making. It may be many, many lives before that is the case. But there is a part of the divine plan which each one holds. And that must be allowed to emerge with trust. Of course, there is a need for law, of course, because the elemental nature will act up and want to rebel against the sound and protective laws which are in place to hold the real values strong and current. It's a balance, really. We can't have license, nor can we have draconian control of the totalitarian forces. Curiously enough, the intention of the dictating agents in both the Catholic Church and in Russia is basically good. They believe that the uneducated masses are not fitted to decide for themselves what they should hear, think, or decide. They must be protected, in one case by decrees and prohibitions from the Vatican, by the organized priesthood, as to right attitude and right action to be followed without questioning, and in the other by withholding the truth. So, as I said before, the lack of trust in the human being and discounting of the contribution of every human being are at fault here, making men into sheep. Better to be a goat, I guess, in this particular context. They have more independence. They are the initiates. They climb for themselves. The sheep are herded, and the loyal sheepdogs do what they have to do to keep everybody within the fold. What should happen if they begin to think for themselves and escape? What would happen? Lack of control, lack of predictability on the part of the forces which are in power could result overthrow of forms of government which are no longer accepted by the will of the people. But men are awakening everywhere, and given some sound leadership, where do we find it, which at present is not to be found in any country in the world, they can be trusted to swing the tide into a great harmonizing and unifying movement. Let's remember that Roosevelt had died by this time, and DK assumes that no leader was really offering what he calls, oh, come on now, sound leadership. Well, I mean, everyone has their virtues. I think Truman was the president at this time, and he had his virtues. But the standard must be very high. I don't know whether Attaturk had died. I suppose I can find that out very quickly. Kemal Attaturk. Okay, yeah, well, he died in 1938, so the Tibetan had great praise for him as using the Shamballa force in a manner that was not selfish, that was disinterested, as it were, not self-interested. Would he have included Attaturk as giving sound leadership? He says his use of the Shamballa force was amazingly disinterested or proper. I forget the exact word. But the compliment was definitely there. Very different now than the reaction against Attaturk by those who wish to be involved in establishing the old religion, which, along with all the Abrahamic religions, are becoming passé. Really already are. As we study the effect of the principle of conflict as the instigator of eventual harmony in relation to nations, let us remember that the widespread extent of the conflict is indicative of climax, that the points of crisis which express the conflict are today well known to all men, that a point of tension has now been reached, of which the United Nations is a symbol, crisis, tension, and then emergence, which will eventually prove to be the agent that will bring about a point of emergence. And indeed, it has emerged, but the selfish, personal interests in every country work against it. The United Nations is not perfect. No man-made organization, even if inspired from within, is perfect. But it's the best we have. And as I said before, I think important, should it sustain itself in the ongoing preparation for the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ. Crisis, tension, emergence. I would ask you to keep these three phrases descriptive of the working of the ray of harmony conflict, through a conflict, constantly in mind in relation to the development of your own life, in the life of your nation or of any nation, and the life of humanity as a whole. Three phases. We have to emerge. Three phases through which we all must pass. Crisis, tension, emergence. They embody the technique whereby the spiritual hierarchy of our planet brings good out of evil without originating the evil or infringing the free will of mankind. So important according to the Syrian law of freedom. I mean, the hierarchy could take over, we've been told. It's strong enough to do that, but then what? Humanity, we are told, would learn nothing. And if the disciples, per se, as a group, got into power, it would lead to a far greater cleavage between those representing hierarchy and those, the elemental life, than now exists. So everything has to be co-measured carefully. And thus it is when Shamballa assesses what it may do without generating evil and without infringing the free will of mankind. It simply isn't allowed. Those who are members of the hierarchy are not allowed, according to the Syrian law of freedom, to infringe the free will of mankind. And they certainly are not going to originate the evil. They may end up somehow evoking it by taking a strong stand for the good. Then a counterattack will be called forth from those forces that just don't want to see the kind of progress into the wonders of the new age which are promised to us. I guess the stakes couldn't really be higher if we actually do begin to see, the possibilities. Mostly positive possibilities, but not to be achieved without sacrifice and without a real battle. Hopefully kept mostly on the subjective side. Some of the explosions are coming out, the murders, the bombs, the outer kind of destruction, terrible, but maybe nothing compared to what might take place if this whole psycho-spiritual conflict actually precipitated onto the physical plane. There are those in the world today possessed of nuclear weapons who, being immature and egoistic, seem not to know what havoc could be generated. And it's hoped that there will be enough wisdom to prevent this type of disastrous precipitation. DK wanted the Second World War to be kept on the subjective level. Maybe, interestingly enough, because it wasn't, the broom of Shamballa really swept clean. And the words of Master Moria, the worse the better, actually occurred. In fact, it was so terrible that it allowed for a kind of cleansing filled with suffering that gave humanity entirely new possibilities. But we must not fall into that trap that happened in the 19th century, where musicians and artists and those of high soul perspective were released into society prematurely to uplift humanity, but it didn't work. Materialism and blood and iron still took over. And the great movement in consciousness that began in the mid-century of the 20th century, that movement, so popular in a number of the Western countries especially, must not prove to have been in vain, must not prove to have been futile in redirecting human consciousness towards higher possibilities. It's a battle all the way between the soul and personality of humanity. There are certain nations which are necessarily more responsive to the energy of the fourth ray than some of the others, because it is either the energy which is conditioning their personality activities or that which conditions their soul expression. Well, Italy, fourth ray personality; Japan, fourth ray soul; Germany, fourth ray soul. Interesting, the Axis powers there. Brazil, fourth ray soul; Austria, fourth ray soul; And India, fourth-rate personality. Probably leaving some out, but you get the idea. Forget not that nations are like individuals expressive of soul and body, body being, in this case, personality. The nations responsive to this ray energy are. Okay, well, it's going to say India, whose personality are material rays. Notice how personality is equated with materialism, is that of harmony through conflict. This can be seen in full expression in that unhappy country. During the years following the war, terrible conflict between Hinduism and Islam, the division which created Pakistan, the very bloody, horrible conflict. You've seen pictures maybe of vultures eating their fill on the dead that resulted from this. It's been a battleground down the ages, says Master DK. Well, down the ages, fourth ray. India is old and crystallized in her separativeness, in her myriads of diversified sects and religious groups, in her manifold languages, and in her ancient antagonisms. This is an assessment from a master 70 years ago. It will be long before there's any basic synthesis or harmony, so it's not there. It's part of the personality or material ray. And, well, there's movement now. And India entering the more modern world, maybe developments in its a more cosmopolitan approach. But it will be long, he says, before there's any basic synthesis or harmony. There lies her problem, and unfortunately she lacks pure, disinterested leadership. I guess, okay, is this, well, Gandhi was assassinated, wasn't it, in 48? Anyway, there's that word disinterested, not personal, not advancing a partial cause, adhering to high principles, as is the case elsewhere in the world. Party politics and religious cleavages condition her many peoples. And, you know, if we've seen lately some of the terrible things that happened there, it is based upon these cleavages. And I suppose on the conflict side of the fourth ray still, the soul energy of India is that of will and power, or government. But that spiritual energy will not come into true activity, but will come into some kind of activity, until she has resolved her many differences. So somehow harmony within the personality aspect has to develop before the real first ray can emerge, and has returned to the old ways of spiritual understanding and enlightened wisdom, which distinguished her many centuries ago, a great Mecca, or the deepest form of understanding. And here's something that may seem surprising when we think of how India recently, in terms of its wisdom, has been revered. India has nearly lost the light, but when she has passed through the coming points of crisis and has achieved a point of united tension, not just fragmented tension, then she will find the door or point of emergence into light. United tension, that's the idea. And the fractious fighting under the lower fourth ray has to cease. Now here he's going to talk about, you know, the various nations and their relationship to the fourth ray. His assessment of India, I think, very direct. Has there been progress? It seems so. There's certainly been the technological entry of India into the more modern world, and the will to become a more modern nation. Still, there's so much ignorance, you know, in that land of profound wisdom. But among so many of those who are still coming either from Venus or Jupiter, you know, those whose soul ray or whose egoic lotus is not very unfolded, earlier forms of humanity, taking incarnation there, it's almost inevitable that there will be certain strata of society where there's a lot of ignorance, in addition to the profound learning of yesteryear, the country that gave us the Yoga Sutras and the Vedas, at least promoting their development, and the Upanishads. I remember when I went to India, that's what I expected to find, but I didn't find that. I found all the kinds of troubles that DK talked about coming from the lower aspect of the fourth ray, the constant conflicts and the selfishness. And personality energy is just out of control. But I think it is improving. And it's amazing how rapidly things can improve when there's the real national will for that to happen. It is, after all, a first-rate country. And behind all of the fractiousness is that great first ray of the Brahmanical religion that speaks of the one great reality. So there is certainly hope in that regard. The fourth ray is also the ray governing the soul expression of the German race, calls it a race. It's harmony through conflict, but her materialistic personality on the first ray, focused in the emotional nature and not yet under control of the soul, is conditioned by the first ray of power. So what he says is first ray personality working out through the uncontrolled emotional nature. I think we saw that in the tremendous religious-like devotion to Nazism and that will, irrational will to conquer the world. Deutschland über alles. Oh, it's a little like America First, isn't it? It's a purely personal position, unrealized by those who advance it. Germany as a nation is too young, immature as a nation, okay, and negative because of its Pisces personality. Basically, he says Pisces makes the negative German people. To realize the true uses of power. Although, increasingly when you look at the more fourth ray role she seems to be taking on under, looks like some quite wise leadership today. There's been developments, and of course we can look forward to Master DK writing of these developments when next he writes. It's always his perspective which will be extremely interesting to us. I mean, he doesn't mince words, really. Alice Bailey had to work for him not to be careful about being too direct with the students, because she knew their ultra-sensitive nature, and he simply wanted to speak the truth and said he would, but I think he pulled his punches a little bit with her saying, "Oh, you can't say that." I wonder how many of us could take the straight truth from the master. I'm not numbering myself among them. I know it can at first be pretty devastating to have your illusions about yourself shattered and to be, as it were, in his words, blasted wide open. Well, we have to be disinterested and impersonal on this path and pretty much say, if that's the way it is, that's how it is. I accept that and work to improve. So the true uses of power. She lacks the wisdom to use power, and her sense of inferiority based on youth, and maybe on the Pisces energy, leads her to misuse it when she has it. Now, what kind of perspective is that? Very unusual, and the perspective of a master. The German race is very old. Well, he says that the conflict between the German and the Jews is, the implications takes us back almost to the previous solar system, because they are related to each other so closely. We know the Jews are from, by and large, the true Jew, the nomad, is from the previous solar system. The German race is very old, and the German leaders during the past 100 years have confused racial issues and national ambitions. Well, he told us that the most materialistic of societies would emerge should the Nazis actually win. The ancient Teutonic race, I recall reading that Hitler, under the influence of some Austrian racially motivated philosophers, wanted to return to a period 250,000 years ago when the great Teuton, equipped with all of these great strengths and psychic capacities, ruled. But the nation is new. And any attempt to return, always ends in disaster. As when Japan tried to return to the samurai, and Italy to the glory of Rome, and maybe Israel to the glories of a previous nation that was powerful thousands of years ago. Races are basically subjective and nations are basically objective. Well, that's something we have to have in mind, right? So the race can be very old, but the present vehicle through which the race is working can be very new and subject to all the immaturities of that which is new. Their leaders have permitted the ideal of power, which is a great spiritual responsibility, to lead them to make the Germanic race synchronize with the German nation. Very different thing. So this is, what is it? A confusion between the objective and subjective, between the race and the nation. I think that's very clear, don't you? So in this gathering of types, there being no pure racial type, DK says, into a nation, the objective nation is exalted with its political power seen as eventually supreme, and the long history of the German race and what it really had and could contribute is negated. It was this immaturity and this misguided, almost childish ambition which set the principle of conflict operating violently through the World War. And that's the sole ray, of Germany, but it's also the ray of humanity, of its kingdom, of its monadic group. So Germany was influential in evoking the presence of the fourth ray in its conflict aspect through humanity. Interesting. Every one of the Axis powers, 2 fourth-ray souls, 1 fourth-ray personality. Astonishing. It was this immaturity and this misguided, almost childish ambition which set the principle of conflict operating violently through the World War in order to bring to an end the increasing nationalism of Germany, read egoism, and of all the nations. The separativeness of egotism. Great Britain is at the point of emergence from the nationalistic thought form, though there are attempts to bring back the Britain of old. The United States and Russia are arriving. The first at the point of tension where the concept is concerned, and the other at the point of crisis. Well, the United States, point of tension, and Russia, point of crisis at that time. USA, point of tension, and Russia, point of crisis. Germany's point of crisis and of tension led to the explosion of the World War. By the way, I've got to say that I've been going on for about an hour now, but I'm trying to think, given my sort of recuperative mode here, I'm just going to keep going and not get into stopping this at 1 hour. Maybe I'll stop at 2, as it will save me some steps and save some energy. So please bear with me. So it's still number 86, but it's going to be, I think, a 2-hour program. Germany's point of crisis and of tension led to the explosion of the World War. Anytime you attempt to impose your national ways upon all others, you're going to evoke a reaction from them. And at last, England entered the war and the US entered the war, and those nations closer to the good, in this instance, entered the war and opposed this attempted imposition. Nevertheless, after due process of pain, of re-education, let pain bring due reward of light and love, we're told. After due process of pain, of re-education, and of training in right human relations, the German people will discover, you might almost say rediscover, their soul, and then the soul-infused personality of Germany will demonstrate in a unique manner the significance of harmony. You can almost feel it coming now under the leadership of someone who does seem to be a mature leader at this time in history, Angela Merkel, a trained scientist of high degree, and one who seems to have a great deal of maturity when compared to certain other world leaders of the times. Certainly she represents more than the will to impose its own way. The fourth ray does seem to be coming through, and since in 1924, I think it was, there was an initial emergence of the fourth ray, and now in 2025, another emergence coming, I think it augurs well for the expression of the soul of Germany. We don't know the degree to which the suffering and karma for the previous tyrannies will overtake them. We don't know when it will happen, but there is movement, it seems, in the right direction. Whatever your politics may be, I don't think we can dispute that the present leader of Germany is a mature person, sometimes shockingly so when compared to the juvenility of other world leaders. The basic and subjective synthesis of the German race must not be confused with the separate nation of the German people. Well, this is something we've been trying to say. The German race and the present nation are two different things. And, when you see the separativeness, which might be called the sin of the Jews, and the separativeness, which was the sin of the Germans, you see something very closely related, and you understand how they are both connected as relatives, a family war, you might say. I don't know whether that takes the German race back to the previous solar system, but certainly there is a strong subjective relationship between the Germans and the Jews, and let's just say, nothing is more terrible than a war among relatives, a war which is basically a civil war among those who are closely related. So the basic subjective synthesis of the German race must not be confused with the separate nation of the German people. And the underlying emotional, trying to keep this from being too, underlying emotional and sentimental unity, using the word sentimental in its correct sense, must not be confounded with territorial unity. So two are subjective and one is material and objective. Sounds like, I've often wondered how Hitler, as a believer in reincarnation, could possibly justify the elimination of the Jews and other, quote, undesirables, knowing that the souls had to return and would return in different form, but they would still be the same souls. He had no power over that. So it was a big mistake on his part to look entirely at the objective form and not realize the immortality and the necessity to return of the inner human being. There is a racial and subjective unity between the British Commonwealth of Nations, as it was called in those days, and the United States of America, but this, in turn, must not be confused with the outer national groupings and aims. So, a strong second-ray subjectivity shared between two groups. Of course, the United States is a melting pot now, and maybe we can say that the British were among the originals to inhabit that territory when the great migrations were beginning. And I think this is also true, when you look at Canada, you look at New Zealand, you look at Australia, I think Britain, United Kingdom, America. There's a progressive second-ray sharing of quality, which unites them subjectively. But the outer nation, the present outer form of expression must not be taken as the most real factor. The most real factor is the subjective relationship. And one of our great tasks is to help people learn to think subjectively. It's so easy to just get caught up in the senses and think that what you see is what you get, and that the senses reveal reality. Well, everything is reality in a way. Even illusion is reality from a certain perspective. But we cannot think that it represents the highest form of reality. It's simply a limited perception, and there are other wider and deeper perceptions which must be held in mind. So he's going through these nations and giving some very interesting ideas, some of which can be found in the book, The Destiny of the Nations, but others of which are new here. Really what the Tibetan offered in synthesis is rare and wonderful. And if we can have the endurance to put it together, our perspective will increase tremendously. Italy is also influenced by the ray of harmony through conflict. It's got a Sagittarius sixth-ray soul and Leo sixth-ray soul and a Sagittarius fourth ray personality, because her personality or material expression, notice, all the time, material expression when he talks about personality. It's also equated with what we call body. So let's somehow remember that. Body and soul is really personality and soul, not just the external physical vehicle. And our sin, if you want to call it that, is materialism of consciousness. And we have to make our consciousness much more subtle than at present it is, without falling into the glamour of ignoring the actuality, I call it that, not reality, actuality, which the senses reveal. Well, her personality or material expression is conditioned by this ray. During the war, Italy had a king, a dictator, and a pope. All that. And this produced a vortex of conflict in the highly intelligent Italian people. I don't know how often it is given that the Italians are a highly intelligent nation. I know he says that of Spain too. I think it's true. Otherwise, the school of the Mahachohan on the third ray, the advanced school, would not be found in Italy. And when you look at the emergence of the Renaissance, it was largely due to a very strong impulse of the third ray. Of course, the fourth ray came through very strongly in the artistic expression, third and fourth rays, but we're talking about the coming school, advanced school, taking over from probably a fifth ray presentation, maybe, in southern France with its fifth ray soul. But the third ray is not usually considered a part of Italy's equipment. It isn't, unless we're talking monadic, and DK is not going so far as to give us the monadic ray of nations. I don't know how that would be done anyway. Whether the nations stay around long enough to have a monadic ray. Something stays around long enough to have a monadic ray. But anyway, there it is, the Mahachohan school. And you kind of look at the legend, if it is that the Comte de Saint-Germain or the Master R, from Hungary, Rákóczi, was given an education by the Medicis. Is that true? If so, it's a link between a great third ray monad, seventh ray soul, Master R, and maybe the future school, found in Italy, to be found in Italy. So we have certain indications that the third ray is very important for Italy, at least in terms of its spiritual educational process. And when you look at some of the groups in Italy, spiritual groups, they do seem to really know how to handle the physical plane and manifest their intentions. That's probably a presage of what is to come. So a very vortex of force, a king, a dictator, Mussolini, a pope, Pius, I suppose. The dictator is no longer there. Okay, Mussolini was kicked out with greater ease than Hitler. The monarchy has also disappeared, and only the continuing voice of the Vatican is left. Curiously enough, is it so? Receives less attention in Italy than in other Catholic countries. Is a prophet without honor in its own home? Well, let's hope that the very humanitarian voice of the present Pope, who is from Argentina after all, receives a lot of attention because he seems to be overshadowed by the Christ principle, with Master Jesus as basically the head of the Christian church, subjectively. So, the Tibetan knows what he's talking about here. I wouldn't have thought this to be the case, but maybe the Pope is just too close to pay such attention as one might in Catholic Poland or other Catholic countries. Conflict during the centuries has done much for the Italian people. It's hard to read sentences like that out of the conflict can emerge good things, and their highly extroverted psychology, okay, Sagittarius, Leo, fourth ray, well, it doesn't make extroversion for sure, but it certainly can be very expressive in that respect, has produced in them a balance which may prove most promising in the future. It's good to see as Master DK sees, he sees from the inside out. We don't see that, and we might not say that if we were assessing the Italian people, always talking with their hands, It's the third ray appendage, and expressively externalizing what they think, often with strong emotion, though highly intelligent people, as he says. The conflict of thought through which they have passed during the past 100 years, maybe up to maybe he's talking up to 1850, 1840 something, has worked well for them. Torn as they are by party politics, in revolt against ecclesiasticism, and lacking leadership, they are nevertheless well on the way to resolution of their problem. I suppose it means to bring the fourth ray under control and somehow to get organized. There's that joke, that overheard in Europe. I don't know if I would say it right, but heaven is where the police are British, the cooks are French, the how does it go? I forget. Cooks are French, yeah. Police are British, and the lovers are Italian, something like that, and it's all organized by the Swiss, something like that. Hell is where the police are German, the cooks are British, the mechanics are French, the lovers are Swiss, and it's all organized by the Italians. I left something out in the beginning, but it takes both the shadow side and the excellence of any nation and kind of pokes good-hearted fun. Let's see. So what was it in the beginning? I think, yeah, the mechanics are French. I think what I left out was the idea in the first that the mechanics are German. So the police are British. They don't even carry a gun. The cooks are French. The mechanics are German. The lovers are Italian, and now what have I left out again? All organized by the Swiss. A friend of mine told me a story about bragging amongst technologists where the United States sent to Switzerland the tiniest piece of steel of the utmost tenuity, strong and ultra thin, so thin that just amazingly thin. And the Swiss sent it back having drilled a hole in it. I always thought that was very amusing. Every nation has its characteristic qualities, both for very good and also a little bit on the shadow side. When the fourth ray of harmony through conflict is the energy expressing itself through the soul, the energies are that of the country concerned, that the country concerned is nearing the path of discipleship or the path of probation. Well, that's Germany, that's Austria, that's Brazil. Austria and Germany are nearing the path of discipleship. Brazil is on the path of probation and will rapidly move forward. What a perspective DK has here, you know. How would we know these things from the inside out, except under his guidance? Austria is nearer true discipleship than is Germany, and spiritually Austria has much eventually to give, a combination of the fourth and fifth rays. Well, we can't really say, you know, in terms of musicians, well, they stand about equal, the three great Bs, Bach, Beethoven, Brahms from Germany, but Austria certainly had its Mozart and other Schubert, other great composers. But apparently there's a greater harmony in Austria, even though, you know, Hitler was from Austria, but it accepted this annexation, and it went with the German power, but it has its own excellence. Austria is nearer true discipleship than is Germany, and spiritually Austria has much eventually to give. Spiritual leadership will not be lacking once a measure of security and better living conditions have been assured. Well, you know, it must be stated that much of the nefarious Nazi ideology or Nazi and philosophy came from Austria. There were certain Austrian philosophers who had their views, and those views inspired Hitler, and these views were very uncharitable towards all inferior people, as they deemed them to be. But I guess Austria did not per se originate Nazism. However, easily it succumbed. But DK is talking about deeper things here and about the gifts, the deeper things and the gifts which they have to offer. Germany has a bitter price to pay because her immaturity and childish interpretation of world affairs, her lacking of thinking capacity, her lack of thinking capacity, and her curious innate cruelty permitted the forces of evil temporarily to work through Germany and precipitate the world conflict. What is that bitter price? Has it been paid? There's been a great division in Germany. I guess from my perspective, it has not yet totally been paid, but there are certainly signs of a much better orientation. And there are those in that country that represent the soul of the nation, and those who, I suppose, continue to represent the personality. So let us see what the future may offer. There is the recrudescence of Nazism, neo-Nazism, many places around the world, but I think it's an ideology which is proven to be failed, and although there is a recrudescence here and there, it cannot rise to any degree of prominence. As a matter of fact, Germany has laws against the rising of Nazism, having been through tremendous suffering. But remember, this was written in 48, so this was after the war. So, yes, Germany paid in the final days of the war a tremendous price through the destruction of its cities and the total defeat inflicted upon it. But then in came the Marshall Plan and rebuilt Germany for many motives, some of them good. And Germany has risen due to the innate abilities of its people. But one can imagine that the cruelty, the separativeness, the offering of a instrument for the Black Lodge, over the years, something will occur. I've also wondered about the United States, the first to drop a nuclear weapon. Nothing's been dropped since. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Will there be some sort of nuclear karmic retribution in that respect? Although DK did seem to celebrate this as a great spiritual event and a tremendous blow against materialism, proving that matter, as we understand it, was not the reality. Of course, he's looking at things in a very deep sense, and not in terms of the destruction of the outer form. But Germany will recover, provided she does not again permit herself to become a battleground, which fourth ray, okay, owing to her strategic position in Central Europe. So DK does offer the possibility that this, may happen. Although there does seem to be a certain amount of stability using the fourth ray and a better expression of the first ray now. And Germany does not seem to be a menace at this time. The lesson, I think, was deeply learned, but then who knows about the flood of reincarnating souls, some of whom may be now in other races, migrating to Germany. The possibility for conflict is still very great. We have another 8 years as this is being prepared until 2025. And much of a very form-disturbing nature may be still possible. The hierarchy, or the Tibetan representing them, says they know what will happen, but it seems they are not allowed to say. Humanity has to be left free of the impress of that sense of inevitability. It has to work out its own fate. So it is for this recovery that all men of goodwill must work. And, in a way, you might say that this is in process. Germany is, in many ways, a rather liberal country. Certainly the liberality of it now is well represented, and the structure of law prohibits the rising again of those structures which the Black Lodge used, such as the Nazi Party. There is a kind of neo-Nazism here and there, but it's not strong, and it's pretty well repudiated. There are still places in Germany which are more conservative than others, and in which the ancient racism may still lurk. But, 70 years is a long time, especially in the fast-moving modern world, and it seems that Germany has made certainly a commercial success of its endeavors, much helped at first by the United States, who saw the threat of a Russian takeover and wanted to strengthen the West through West Germany. It was probably a very wise move. There's so much going on behind the outer politics, and those who are in the first ray department, the occultists among them can see these things. It is perhaps appropriate to point out here that the spiritual forces of the planet do not greatly fear a renewed outbreak of war upon the physical plane. Well, that's one of those things that it's good to hear the Tibetan say. Elsewhere, maybe written a little earlier in The Problems of Humanity, he really gave a warning about a possibility that can be visioned, or the need to start the human race all over again. It was a dire warning, talking about the religious war that could be imminent. And we certainly see the ingredients with the irrational, sometimes irrational sixth ray expressing itself through Islam particularly, and to a certain extent fundamentalist Christianity, and the attitude of certain Israeli factions who think they have a divine right to the land given to them from their experience in biblical times. Those sixth ray tendencies are very dangerous, and one can see why the Tibetan warned us about these possibilities. But here he says, okay, greatly fear, maybe somewhat fear, greatly fear a renewed outbreak of war upon the physical plane. There are many chances that it can be averted, because something's there. There's a war. We're in the middle of it. It's largely psycho-spiritual war with occasional explosions and eruptions of a most disgusting, horrific kind on the physical plane, but still on a relatively small scale, however much those forces might seek to bring about a general nuclear calamity, or a calamity based upon poisoning of the environment, all kinds of things, where a large scale disruption of life and form would occur. And of course that would lead to retaliation and could plunge us into the very thing that DK says here can probably avert it. There are many chances that it can be averted, because the mounting revolt of the masses against physical plane war, the general fatigue of the nations, and the use of the United Nations Council for the ventilation of difficulties and problems may prove effective, not necessarily will. These are about problems, these are about methods to avert what must not happen, the precipitation of the third phase of the war, which could basically destroy humanity as we know it and lead to the necessity, as DK says, to see if there might be a human experiment that could raise up a human race which could truly live in right human relations. Each of the three great powers, I guess what we're talking about here, India, Germany, Italy, Austria mentioned, Brazil, of course, involved, but still on the path of aspiration and still housing, I think, many young souls who as lotuses are said to have come from Venus or Jupiter, and largely, I think, upon the second ray. Each of the three great powers has its own internal conflict, conditioned by its historical tradition, its national emphasis, and its developed habits of thought, or, as the case may be, of feeling. So the conflict goes on, but we've already seen that out of the conflict may emerge something of value. Now he begins to mention Great Britain, which is not really a fourth-ray nation, and doesn't appear to have the fourth ray in its makeup. I would say its mind is more on the fifth ray. Maybe its astral body more on the second ray, first ray, and its physical body certainly on the seventh ray, reflecting the seventh ray of London, I would say. The major conflict in Great Britain at this time is between the reactionary thinkers and those unskilled laborers in the political field who favor the socialistic ideology. So, what is this in the present time? It's the Tories and the Liberals. And we see that the fight is going on at this time with the pendulum, because of fear, swinging perhaps more towards the Tories, but it's a very volatile situation and can even change within a year. This conflict goes deep and is undermining and destroying old forms and producing intense national friction in all groups and parties. So here he's basically saying conflict can be a good thing in terms of the destruction for which it is responsible. One group is fighting to preserve the old order, England as it was. England for the English. The other group is fighting fiercely to abolish all the old ways in the shortest possible time, not necessarily the path of wisdom, because English law, English maturity, all these things have to be valued, taken into consideration. You can't, some of the tendencies of the sign Aquarius is to throw the baby out with the bathwater and want such rapid change that the very solid values of the past are abrogated when they should be preserved. So the preservation of the old ways or the abolition of those old ways. Other groups are fighting for their various ideologies and complicating the problem. There are a number of parties. The interesting thing is that the conflict is largely between party leaders and their immediate convinced followers, with the mass of people questioning the wisdom, the capacity, and the activities of both groups and slowly deciding that they like and desire neither of them, but lacking real leadership, they know not what to do. Well, maybe this is emerging. He basically says we do have to depend upon the wisdom of the people and their innate, can we call it soundness of heart? The heart of humanity is sound but oft asleep, he tells us, at some point. So, a third party in all these places will emerge, and it will be a party that expresses the values much more of the new group of world servers than of the polarized, ultra-liberal, ultra-conservative groups, neither one of which has the entire story of wisdom. They have to be blended, and it is the task of the fourth ray new group of world servers to blend them. The predisposing characteristic of the British is a sense of justice. Well, London, among other things, ruled by Libra and the seventh ray. And it is for this that the people seek justice, fair play. principled uh, approach. Principles more important than people per se, and this being reinforced also by the first-ray personality, which, when correctly used, adheres to principle rather than persons. They find, however, that neither party has an effective plan or program, that both are animated by party politics, and that the interests of the people as a whole, which could be served by a wise coalition, are not of major importance to the present party leaders. Well, that's not only in Britain. He told us somewhere that those who engage in politics are on the first ray, the seventh ray, but also the sixth ray, especially in a country like the United States where the sixth ray is so strong. Party loyalties tend to blind the adherents to the will of the people. I don't want to get too topical on this, but we see that working out right now at this present time with the attempt to overthrow the Affordable Care Act, or what has been nicknamed Obamacare, simply because it's put forward by a Democrat, and to come forward with a plan which is much less generous to the people and will leave millions off the rolls of the insured. And in this case, winning for your party is of greater importance than the fate of the people who lose their health insurance. The big battle is against selfishness, and it is a necessary stage at first, but time is, with humanity moving towards the fifth kingdom of nature, that selfishness has to be abandoned. The internal conflict, I guess this is in Britain, is slowly, however, going to produce a harmony of purpose and of intention within the mind of the population. Well, the basic idea here is that conflict will eventually, produce harmony, at least under the fourth ray. Men tire of conflict, and being on the fourth ray, they can't just demonstrate one aspect of that ray, they have to demonstrate both at the right time. So this will be largely the result of increasing power of women in the land and their increasing penetration in municipal and national politics. I don't remember reading this because Master Moria is the one who basically says women are bringing in the new age. But here's DK saying, okay, women in politics, this is a salvation. I think we do see it in our country, the United States. We have seen strong Tory leaders, Margaret Thatcher and now Theresa May, representing perhaps some of the older values. But the idea that women are emerging as the equals of men, at least in the Western countries, in the political field, reinforces the idea of Master Moria that women are bringing in the new age. And when you look at the three great amanuenses, HPB, Alice Bailey, Helena Rurick, what would we have of the ageless wisdom without their cooperation with the great masters? Indeed, they, through their receptivity, their cooperation, whatever it was they needed to demonstrate, they have given us the life-saving teaching. So, I'm glad to see this. I forget certain things that I read, and this is a very heartening quote from the Tibetan. The quality of the British historical retrospect has been predominantly masculine. You would expect it in a first-rate personality country. Today, the balancing factor of feminine interpretation and feminine point of view is needed and will be provided. Always the balance. After all, London, Libra and Leo. But Libra and the Seventh ray. Libra will insist on the balance. Canada has some of that too, I believe. Even China has that. It's a very first-rate country. The leadership has been largely masculine, but women play a very important role in the overall Chinese government, and increasingly so. It's a good thing, very good thing, because the balance is needed. Great Britain, from the angle of its personality or material problem, notice the personality always presents a problem, is governed by the ray energy of the ray of will or power, whilst the soul of the country is conditioned by the ray of love wisdom. In this, you have the presentation of a positive and negative energy. Well, what's positive, what's negative? Basically he's saying personality is negative and material and represents body. And when they are fused and blended, you will have a balance and a wisdom which is at present lacking. Although, United Kingdom, let's say, is among the most mature. So, this being said, still the UK is among the most mature, certainly more mature than the United States, than Russia, and some of the more nascent countries. Now, we're not dealing here now with countries. We dealt with countries that were on the fourth ray. I don't know about the mind of France, whether perhaps with its great love of the language and so forth, might be on the fourth ray, whereas, but it has a very strong fifth ray soul, but London has the fifth ray soul with Leo, but the mind of England and of the United Kingdom in general, though maybe more of England, has the fifth ray, I think, because of its, demonstrated through its practicality and its concreteness, and even the whole idea that its currency is called the pound. It has something to do with weight and with material measures. So anyway, here's France. In France, where the contributing rays are both along the line of intellect, 5 and 3, right? You have necessarily and naturally a strong materialistic influence. And the conflict there is hard to resolve. But remember, we're aided here by Pisces, which is the soul sign, right? Not so much by Leo, which conduces to pride, but, aided by Pisces. Soul sign and giving the second and sixth rays. It is ever the mind aspect which produces all the separativeness. What do we have when we think of the mind? The slayer of the real, but also, when used properly under the soul, the revealer of the real. Produces all the separativeness, the cleavages and the differences in the human arena in France. And, we might almost say anywhere, but take a look at a country that has two mental rays as its major rays. China has odd number rays, but not that. United States is soft line. Britain has one soft line and one hard line ray. Austria is soft and hard. Germany is soft and hard. You don't find a lot of nations with the third ray and also another hard line ray. Maybe if we went through it all carefully, we would find something, but I can't think of anything right now. Interestingly enough, we don't find any nation listed by DK with the third ray soul. It's almost as if, although the Orient has the third ray personality in general. But it's almost like the third ray is not the objective with the emerging of the great second ray of love wisdom, the soul ray of the planet. So at least among the nations listed, we don't have the third ray. Mostly it's a balance, so France has a difficult problem being so much on the line of intellect, but as I say, saved somewhat by the Pisces situation, and Paris being ruled by Virgo, which again has a second and sixth ray, and the cult of the Mother of Mary of Notre Dame. There are balancing factors if we look towards astrology. It is ever the mind aspect which produces all the separativeness, the cleavages, and the differences in the human arena in France, making it the playground of untold numbers of conflicting ideas, a diversity of groups and of clashing personalities, and leading to intense preoccupation with France and its welfare. Well, that's Leo, too. Let's not forget self-centered Leo energy of the personality. When you've got a third-ray personality and Leo, you have a potentially very selfish situation. But, France's great scientific contribution of the future, the revelation of the soul under the fifth ray, and Pisces, which has sensitivity to soul, will be a remarkable contribution. So all will balance out, and, one day this will be a sacred planet, and one day we will go through the judgment day, and one day those who remain on this planet will be those who are on the path, 3/5, and one day this period of dreadful conflict through which we are passing as our planetary logos seeks to deal with certain personality issues that were said he has not conquered yet. One day all of that will be a thing of the past, and we will each have to play our part according to the particular aspect of divine will which we are intended to present. There is small interest in anything else, or in any other nations or groups, except as they affect France and the French people. And you might really say, even when you look at people, this is the worst of Leo. Everything revolves around me. I am the center of the universe. I'm interested in things only as they aspect me. We see this among some political figures. It's naive. It's juvenile. You think we would have transcended all this, but somehow a lot of people just aren't there yet. And yet, in a short time, have to be. The French are in no way as yet ready to balance conflict with harmony, even interiorly. Well, they don't have that ray, really. I don't think. Let's see if I look up Paris, Paris. Well, it's Virgo and Capricorn. Capricorn is the hardline rays, but Virgo, second and sixth ray, Paris. And here are those brilliant analyses that DK gives of the nations, which set for us an example of how we could analyze the charts of human beings. Wonderful. How he brings in the ray chart, the astrological chart, the rays of the astrological factors, all with their contributions. And of course, the fourth ray is there under Virgo rulers, with Moon bringing in the fourth ray and Mercury bringing in the fourth ray. That's a little bit down on the totem pole, but it is there. And let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, well, it's brilliant analysis. And I would strongly recommend that when we do the charts of people, we consult the destiny of the nations for the manner in which DK analyzed these countries. I've often thought it's really perhaps the most esoteric way that we can work. The qualities of the mind, pride, self-centeredness, a separative attitude, well, that's third ray, mental pride, and fifth ray, contempt for those who are not factual, and Leo, a deep satisfaction with one's own self, plus the fifth ray. Pride, self-centeredness, separative attitude, a selfish planning, that's ray 3, and a materialism which penetrates deep into mass consciousnness, are dominating in their activity and are forced upon the material well-being of France, are focused upon the material well-being of France. I remember when I was a really young person in the 40s, I used to occasionally be taken to the movies by my relatives, and I'd always see the French changing government. I couldn't understand how this government came in and went out so rapidly. It was so unlike the United States. Even at that age, I kind of realized it. It's that tremendous conflict of ideas and some kind of inherent instability with the third ray. So there is materialism here, and when you have a third ray involved in the personality nature, materialism is going to be a factor, as in China, maybe in Greece, in France, maybe there are a couple more, I'm not sure. There is no dominant ideology, okay, because there's no sixth ray there except, from the astrological perspective, so that the conflict is not lifted onto the ideological level, and until a recognized idealism begins to sway the French mind and the mass consciousness, France cannot grow. Well, the idealism will be for the pure truth of the fifth ray. Idealism under Pisces, and for the pure truth of the fifth ray. There is no basic religious or spiritual sense on a large scale, but of course, once it was one of the most religious of countries, with its great cathedral standing as the symbol of that religious orientation. But, as it stands now, according to DK at that time, no basic religious or spiritual sense to be found on a large scale, because the mind, which can so inspiringly illumine the plane of the spirit, is focused primarily upon material living, the three worlds of material living. Well, this pronounced activity of the intellect, of which the French are so proud, third ray, fifth ray, Leo, is largely responsible for the situation in the political and economic fields in France, unstable at that time, more stable now perhaps, plus the difficulties which they share with all the nations which were implicated in the war. Loss, shock, depletion of reserves. Any prospect of internal harmony is still far away, but it will come. And maybe, in more modern times, it has perhaps come. Now when we elect a French president, they last for a while. They may not please everybody, but there seems to be increasing stability in the French situation. It was challenged recently, and the question was, will it go towards division and separatism and so forth, or will it take more of the middle road, which it seemed to do? The people have their will. Forget not what I wrote much earlier in one of my books, that it is France which will eventually reveal the true nature of the soul or of the psyche and inaugurate the era of true esoteric psychology. Remember the ray methods of teaching. And the highest of the fifth ray methods of teaching is esoteric psychology. Strange as it may seem, second ray method is initiation, but esoteric psychology for the high fifth ray. So what a great destiny that is. And all of this will work out, and the masters have to simply have the skill to work it out according to the plan. To do this, she must inevitably find her own soul, and in finding it through the medium of the illumined mind, she will bring light to humanity. Well, that's going to be a fifth-rate task and related to the solar angels, because if you discover the soul, you're going to discover the solar angels. France is, somehow a representative of great ideals over the ages, no matter what condition she may be in now or at that time. Liberty, equality, fraternity. The great lords of liberation have their emblems enunciated as a great ideal through France. And so it's a conflict with materialism and a great inherent soul idealism, which leads towards the light and which will account for a bestowing of the light with great intensity upon humanity. We can say, well, it hasn't happened yet, but the masters see things differently, and many emergences are visible to them which are not yet visible to us. The conflict now raging in France will eventually be resolved into harmony, and France will awaken to the higher spiritual values. It's suffering now under the attacks of the descendants of those they once dominated. The colonialism year of colonialism is having its karmic retribution at this time. Once her soul ray of pure knowledge is active, it will dominate her personality or material ray of active intelligence, once the most powerful of all the rays, but no longer so. On our planet, the true dominating ray is the second ray. He tells us it's the true ray of our planet, and we are slowly passing by and transcending that third ray personality. The task of the ray of harmony through conflict is to bring this about, thus releasing France into the light. Now notice what he's doing here. He's I hope, oh yeah, here it is. So, he is applying fourth ray to many important nations who naturally do not have a prominent fourth ray, except through Paris, the soul ray of Paris. Let's just say it's let's just say that Virgo is the sign with its second and sixth ray. And I think I did look up Paris. Let me just see again if the ray is coming through, because Great Britain, London, Leo, fifth, he gives the sign, but the fifth ray is also coming through Leo as far as Great Britain is concerned. Basically, take a look at this on the Destiny of the Nations. It's an analysis of France, and it's very complete. He shows how the different rays are available. Seventh ray apparently not. Sixth ray not available, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all available. See, that's a question of the major cities. Cities, C-I-T-I-E-S. And here, London, maybe if I look up London, there's a lot of Londons, oh goodness. So, soul ruler, personality ruler, these look to be like the signs, but the rays are also involved. Personality ruler, and I would say personality ray as well, of Great Britain. I hope I'm not mistaken about this. I do seem to remember, if I can get this soul ray of London. London. Let's see if we can find that. Okay, British Empire. Okay, soul ray of London. Okay, ray 2 of via the sun, ruler of Leo, which governs the love, wisdom via the sun, ruler of Leo, which governs the soul of London, and which is a channel of soul force. Ceremonial order coming through, it looks like, in cooperation with Libra. And, okay. Well, I think I have to look into this further. I've always been convinced that the soul ray of London is the 5th, through the 5th sign Leo, and that the soul personality ray of London is Libra with a strong 7th ray, but maybe I'll have to reconsider that slightly. I'll have to do some research here. But I know that these countries, these cities, they do have their soul ray expression. So let's just see here if I can get back to that. Maybe not. Maybe I can't get back to it. In any case, the second ray is coming through the sun, which is through Leo, but it is the 5th sign, and it does give us a first ray and a 5th ray. London ruled by Libra on the outer level, but one of the rulers of Libra is the powerful 7th ray through Uranus, but there's also the 3rd ray coming through Libra per se. So it looks like I'll have to do a little more research on this, and maybe you will too. Okay, friends, well, I think I've maybe done enough for the moment. So this is the end of Raised and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 86. And today is the 17th of July, 2017, and beginning, this is about 2 hours and 5 or 10 minutes, 2 hours or so. And beginning Raised and Initiation Webinar Commentary number 87. I'm not sure when I'll be able to begin it, but sometime soon. I am somehow so interested, maybe, let's see, I wonder if I list, I'm kind of tenacious here, and if I do list like this, London, Geneva, New York, what will it give me? Oh, it does give me, there it is. Oh, I'm glad I found it. London, the 5th ray, in its soul nature, the personality 7th ray. Okay, I knew I was getting it from somewhere. So that should resolve the issue. It is a 5th ray soul coming through a 5th ray sign, Leo, along with the 1st ray, and then the sun, of course, brings the 2nd ray. 7th ray personality accompanies Libra. And the 3rd ray necessarily has to come through Libra, and maybe even some of the 2nd ray. And certainly that sense of justice and fair play. Okay. Whew, relief. When you know something is there in the references, not just probable, but you've seen it, then you go for the hunt for what we call reference lost, which is a whole lot better than reference imagined. Sometimes we read a lot of stuff and we put things together and we make up a reference which doesn't really exist, but which we've inferred. Anyway, this is a solid reference. And notice Tokyo having the exact reverse of rays of its nation. Fourth ray Japan with a sixth ray personality, sixth ray Seoul and Tokyo with a fourth ray personality. Again, the Axis powers really having that strong fourth ray, every one of them. We'll have to look at DK's presentation in his new teaching. I'm sure it will include plenty on the emerging nations and their emerging rays. All right, so that's going to be it for the moment. I'm a little over the 2 hours I promised. And we will continue when I can catch my breath here. So all the best, study hard. The gift of Master DK, extraordinary. I just feel so grateful to be born at a time when one can take advantage of this tremendous gift and the gift coming, which has to be tremendously synthetic in nature, being the third installment of something that began with Madame Blavatsky as his amanuensis. What a gift. All approved by Master K.H., by the Christ, by Sanat Kumara, sanctioned teaching. Not just a lot of invention and fluff and wouldn't be nice if this were so, but the real thing, not allowing humanity to get off easy, challenging us every step of the way, but the real thing. So let's go for the real thing instead of that which pleases our personality. Okay, we'll see you soon. Lots of love to everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.